removing of the organs, embalming. And the poor would have a poor man's version of mummification, where they basically just tossed your body into a really dry pit and hope that it dried out. Alright, so why does this first kingdom come to an end? Well, a lot of it has to do with these patterns of empires falling that we've talked about before and we'll visit many, many times in the future. So, they had to build these huge pyramids. In order to do that, they need a lot of money and forced labor. People don't like that. That causes social instability. People don't like having to pay extra money for their government, and they also don't like it when you force them to abandon their families for years at a time to build the pyramids. So we have social instability that's created. Also, there starts being fights within the royal family over who actually gets to take over. Traditionally, it was the oldest male son, but then uncles started to fight. The brother of the pharaoh would always want to get in there, cousins. So we started to have fights over hereditary succession. Also, when we start having weakness in the central government, people start to instead put their trust in more local or regional leaders. So people start to kind of go away from the central leader and start to focus more on these local, usually like clansmen or family leaders in their area as opposed to the pharaoh. And then just to kind of have the straw that breaks the camel's back, we have some drought and environmental pressures that is causing weakness within the government as well. So we have the breakdown of this big kingdom, the breakdown of the unification, and people just kind of split off into these little regional kingdoms once again, or regional areas. A group of people come in and they kind of change everything. They're the ones who reunify. This is the first invasion into Egypt, and this invasion is happening around the same time as the Akkadians as well as Babylonians in the Middle East. And they are of the same ethnic group and from the same region. And they're called the Hyksos. The Hyksos are a Semitic group, probably from around the same area as the Akkadians, probably more close to modern-day Turkey. Just like the Akkadians and Babylonians, they have the horse-drawn chariots, they have bronze weapons, so they have superior military strength. They are probably forced from their homeland because of environmental pressures, lack of resources, drought, and so they probably initially come to Egypt just looking for a place to settle down and do some small-scale farming. Egypt was probably not very open to them, and therefore they had to start using their military force to basically force their acceptance and eventually take over because of that. The long-lasting effect of the Hyksos, because they were only in Egypt for about 100 years, but they had a long-lasting impact. First off, they bring the wheel in from the Middle East. Remember, the wheel was invented by the Sumerians, but it had never, over the course of 1,500 years, made its way over to Egypt until the Hyksos brought it in. Also, horses existed in the Middle East, but had never made it to Egypt yet. And so they brought in the horse as well as then the horse-drawn chariot. They also brought in bronze that had been in existence in Egypt, or I'm sorry, in the Middle East for over 1,000 years, but had not made its way over into Egypt. So they were bringing in a lot of really good technology. Sometimes it's good to be taken over. Sometimes the people who invade bring advanced technology, and that's what the Hyksos did. So some of the things that the Hyksos did also during their only 110 years of rule, they were able to reunite Upper and Lower Egypt. Remember, it had broken apart at the end of the Old Kingdom, so they brought it back together. They also extended Egyptian control. So they placed themselves in the pharaoh position, and in the name of Egypt, they did some more conquering. And specifically, they moved down into Nubia, which is here in the south, and very slowly started to have more and more political control in that territory. Eventually, the Egyptian nobles, so members of the former Egyptian royal family, they were able to unify and drive the Hyksos out back into the Middle East. So the Hyksos were very short-lived, but you can see they had a very big impact in just 100 years. So this nobility that pushes the Hyksos out, they establish a new kingdom. They establish a new unified era, and they take it over from the Hyksos who had unified and brought back together all these little regional kingdoms again. So they take a family member of the old kingdom, Pharaoh, and they place him on the throne and reestablish that hereditary rule tradition from the same family that had ruled before the Hyksos in the old kingdom. This was the time of the highest food production, agricultural yield, and because of that, we have the largest population during this time. It's during the New Kingdom that we have roughly 4 to 5 million people living in this territory. And also we have increased dominance over Nubia in the south. Remember, the Hyksos had started to push down into the south and take over. But also we start to see Egypt creeping up here into Palestine. So this is where like modern day Israel, Lebanon, those modern day countries are. And that's probably thanks to the Hyksos. As they started to push the Hyksos out, they would chase after the Hyksos into the Middle East, and with that they slowly started to take over some of that territory as they were pushing the Hyksos out. The big legacy that came out of the New Kingdom is, first off, possibly we have the very first monotheistic religion in history, and it's called the Cult of Aten. And the Cult of Aten was established by Akhenaten. Akhenaten was a pharaoh who believed that there was only one god, and that was Aten. All the other gods were just people trying not to give the full credit to Aten. So the Cult of Aten was a short-lived, probably only about 50, 60 years, monotheistic religion, and a lot of people say it's the very first one, and possibly it inspired the other ones. This might be the thing that inspired Judaism to create monotheism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, which we'll talk about later. Also, the other big legacy during this time is temple building. There's a guy called King Ramses II, and he liked to build a lot of temples with statues of him on it. In fact, almost all the big temples around this area that have large statues, these are built by Ramses, and they're statues of him in tribute to him, but they are religious temples. By the time Ramses takes over, everyone has transformed back into the polytheistic religion. People in Egypt didn't really take to a monotheistic religion very well. They liked all their different gods. They didn't believe that it was possible that one god could be in charge of everything. So when Ramses took back over, he built the temples to all these various gods again. And we see these dotted all the way throughout Egypt. All right, so why does it fall? If this is such a big, powerful kingdom with such great agricultural yield, what happens? Well, we start seeing the patterns again. So we have power struggles within the royal family. Is it the uncle who takes over? Is it the oldest son who takes over? We start having regional rebellions. This happens whenever there's empire building. The local people don't like to be controlled by outsiders, so they start to fight back against the foreign rule. Also, as they expand into the Middle East, they are starting to butt up against some of these other Semitic or Indo-European empires that are building. Because remember, we have the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and then there's another group called the Hittites. And the Hittites are stationed here in modern-day Turkey. And they butt right up against Palestine here. So you can see as Egypt is in the green here, is starting to expand, they're going right up against the Hittites. And this causes some tensions, and they have to waste resources on wars with the Hittites. Also, something that's happening is the Nubians in the south are starting to gain a little bit more strength. We're going to talk about Nubia in a second, but Nubia was maybe even more wealthy than Egypt. They were one of the trade centers in the old world. And so they were able to build up defenses continuously against the Egyptian conquerors.